everybody. Thank you for being here today for Safe, Vibrant, and Healthy Community Committee meeting. We have one item on the agenda, Hillsborough Street, Bagwell Street rezoning. We are going to start with 10 minutes for each side. And I will start with the applicant and any people who are here to speak with the applicant. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's start with staff, because I just recalled we never had a public hearing on this. So this is really the first time we're hearing this case from the staff side. And I think it'd be important to get appropriate background and information that you would like to share with us.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. This is Pat Young, Planning and Development Director. I'm going to turn it over to Jason Harden, unless Mr. Raleigh has any comments. Jason is the case planner for this project and has some background and context that I think would be helpful to your conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and committee members. I have some slides that I'm going to go through pretty briskly. There's a fair amount of information on this particular rezoning that I think is relevant to considering it, but I will move quickly as I know there are a number of speakers on the call.
Jason, this is the first time we're hearing this, so let's make sure we get the information out there so all of us are working from the same page. So I'm more interested in having complete information as opposed to rushing through it. Thank you.
Certainly. Is everyone seeing my screen?
Yes.
Great. So the request here is for a number of properties at the intersection of Hillsborough Street and Bagwell Avenue. They combine to form a little bit more than 1 acre. Currently zoned neighborhood mixed use, 4 stories with a shopfront frontage, and some of the parcels along Bagwell are zoned residential 6. And the request, and I'll show the outlines of where these different zoning categories would apply, is for commercial mixed use 7 stories with the shopfront frontage and residential mixed use 3 stories with an urban limited frontage. And there are a number of conditions that the applicant will, I'm sure, talk about, but that I will outline as well. So the request is for 2 different zoning categories to provide a transition from Hillsborough to the neighborhoods north of Hillsborough. So for the northern 57 feet of the site, the request is for residential mixed use 3 stories. So a maximum of 3 stories there. And then the bulk of the site is for commercial mixed use 7 stories. And there are some additional conditions that address height, which I'll show in a few more slides. But for existing zoning context, obviously Hillsborough Street, vibrant mixed use street. You can see the different mixed use zoning categories along Hillsborough Street itself. And then generally moving further north off of Hillsborough Street, more residential zoning categories, R10 and R6, once you go a little bit further to the north. This is a lot to take in, but just mentioning existing zoning along Hillsborough. So NC State's campus, just to the south, generally zoned for 12 stories. Along Hillsborough, a real mix of zoning categories, 3 stories, 4 stories, 5 stories, 7 stories in some locations on the north side of Hillsborough. And then this is a closer look at the site itself, shown on more to the left of the screen. Again, 3 stories, 4 stories. There's some 7-story zoning a little bit further towards the east at Horn Street. And then an aerial view at the existing site and some nearby uses. So generally, again, commercial uses along Hillsborough and more residential to the north. Probably everybody here is familiar with the site, but for anyone who isn't, you have a service station on Hillsborough Street, some existing retail, and then on Bagwell, there are 3 existing detached houses. So the conditions are a number of conditions. So a number of uses that are otherwise permitted in CX, that's community mixed use, would be prohibited, or auto-oriented uses, fuel sales, vehicle repair. In that northern portion, that would be rezoned to RX, generally commercial uses, retail or restaurant prohibited there. No more than 3 bedrooms per unit. Retail would be restricted to within the 112 feet nearest Hillsborough Street itself. Height steps down. I have another slide that illustrates how this would work, but steps down from Hillsborough Street to the north. There would be a required public amenity area that would be accessible along Hillsborough Street, as well as a public art installation visible from Hillsborough Street. Those detached houses that we saw a few slides back, if those parcels are redeveloped, then the structures there would be documented, and anyone who wished to relocate those structures would be able to do so. Some conditions relating to building materials, and then a public bicycle and scooter parking area that goes beyond what would be required by code along Hillsborough or Bagwell. So I mentioned the height transitions that the conditions would establish. So you can see on this slide, 7 stories on roughly the southern half, a little bit more than the southern half, and then transitioning to 5 stories and then to 3 stories. And 3 stories, generally what is permitted in every zoning district in the city of Raleigh, whether mixed use or residential. A couple of numerical comparisons between the existing and proposed zoning. So it would permit more people to live in this area. Existing zoning, the estimate is about 41 units. The rezoning, obviously, by allowing additional height, would allow more people to live here. Estimate is about 144. Setback, because of the conditions, would actually slightly increase compared to existing zoning on the north. Obviously, would also allow more people to work, potentially, depending on how much of the site would be used for office versus residential. So 24,000 to 81,000 square feet, and similar with retail uses. So we do an analysis to look at the potential carbon impacts of zoning decisions. This has a much higher walk score than the average area in Raleigh. And therefore, people who live or work here are more likely to walk or take transit, or auto trips would be shorter than in the rest of Raleigh. So people who live here per capita are going to tend to produce fewer carbon emissions. It also allows more energy efficient housing types than detached houses. So that also provides a per capita carbon reduction. In terms of affordability analysis, it adds to the housing supply, which assists with affordability. Does not include any specifically subsidized units, which is pretty common for a rezoning. Does permit all housing types, so detached houses being on average the least affordable housing type, permits housing types that are more affordable than that. And is within, obviously, walking distance of transit. And when thinking of housing costs, it is best to think of them in conjunction with transportation costs, because transportation costs are related to the location itself. So this is location where people can get by with less reliance on vehicles and vehicle ownership than in other parts of the city. The future land use map designates most of the site to be neighborhood mixed use, and the portion along Bagwell to be low density residential. So the requested CX is inconsistent with that neighborhood mixed use category, and the requested RX is inconsistent with respect to density with the low density residential category. So inconsistent with that future land use map. If this request is approved, it would result in an amendment to that future land use map. The frontage, which I talked about, that's that SH or UL. Those are categories that describe the relationship of a building to the street in terms of the design, street-facing entrances, requiring that parking be behind the building to enhance or support a more walkable, pedestrian-oriented building form. So this request includes that shop front frontage and urban limited frontage. So it's consistent with the city's policy for maintaining a very high level of walkability and pedestrian friendliness along Hillsborough Street. And then the last major element of the city's plans long-range plans for this area came from the Cameron Village and Hillsborough Street area plan. This is a map showing zoning recommendations that are contained within the city's comprehensive plan. This particular site does not have a specific recommendation in the comprehensive plan. So in that sense, it's neutral. However, you see in the comprehensive plan, adjacent properties recommended for neighborhood mixed use 4 stories. Those are currently zoned for 3 stories. And I have a little bit more information about that I'm going to touch on. But in terms of overall comprehensive plan policy analysis, it is consistent with a number of policies that encourage compact development, that encourage growing more around transit, frequent transit, in this case on Hillsborough Street, more than around driving, that allow housing choice, that support reducing carbon emissions, providing more housing supply, frontages that support pedestrian activity and walkability, transitions. You saw that height transition, so transitions in density from taller and denser uses to residential, lower scale residential neighborhoods, and buffering requirements. Similarly, some inconsistent policies as well. We talked about the future land use map and the inconsistency with that map. The 2 housing policies relate to those existing houses that would likely be removed. And then that AP-CH6 relates to the area plan. And I'll talk a little bit more about the area plan and what guidance it provides for this particular site. Overall, though, consistent with the comprehensive plan due to the number of consistencies with those policies that we just looked through, although it is inconsistent with the future land use map, consistent with those policies in the urban form map. Previous recommendations, the Planning Commission voted to support the request, as did Raleigh Historic District Commission, also voted to support the request. They did request that the applicant preserve, that make records of the existing structures, which is now a condition, and that they be offered potentially for relocation. So the last few slides that I have here talk about the Cameron Village and Hillsborough area plan and the guidance that it provides for the site. So that process began several years ago, 2014, produced a report in 2016, adopted by council in 2018, and then you can find that currently in the city's comprehensive plan in an area-specific guidance section, which is what you're seeing right here, which again doesn't provide any specific guidance for these sites. However, looking at the plan report that was produced again in 2016, it did more specifically refer to these sites as being appropriate for 4-story zoning. I realize a bit hard to see, but that salmon colored color used there indicates 4 stories as the recommendation. So not consistent with that particular specific bit of guidance. However, while the area specific guidance that came out of that planning process is certainly significant, it's not the only factor in determining comprehensive plan consistency, as you could see from the number of other policies that were just showed in some of the previous slides. There's key citywide policies that address housing supply and carbon emissions, and the fact that decisions made, the comprehensive plan looks broadly at the city as a whole, and decisions made in one neighborhood affect other neighborhoods, as when housing demand is pushed towards lower income neighborhoods that are experiencing rapid rises in housing cost. And the plan doesn't specify exactly how much weight area-specific guidance should have. It doesn't say that the area-specific guidance means nothing. It doesn't specify that it means everything. It's one element in a balancing act that involves these other citywide considerations. So some of the other considerations other than the policies involve the transition that the conditions create from south to north, proximity not just to very frequent transit on Hillsborough Street, but future bus rapid transit on Western Boulevard, and the consistency with the walkability recommendations of the urban form map. So summarizing, it's not consistent with that area plan guidance, which the staff report reflects. In this case, it would allow 22 additional feet of height beyond what that area plan had envisioned. But given the citywide policies that support additional housing and employment opportunities in areas with high levels of walkability and transit, and that support densities and building forms that reduce carbon emissions consistent with the comprehensive plan overall. And there have been 2 recent rezoning requests that involved areas within that Cameron Village Hillsborough plan. So one was from filed that same year, 2020. Z4020 was a request to go from CX5 to CX7. As with this request, did not have specific guidance on that area specific guidance map. Staff report did not find it to be inconsistent with the area specific guidance, did find it to be consistent overall. That was approved unanimously by the Planning Commission and City Council. I would note that that request involved a little bit less additional height than what the plan had called for. And then the second was resolved a little bit more recently. This is in the Cameron Village or Village District area. It was a request to go from RX 3 stories to RX 7 stories. In that case, both the comprehensive plan area specific guidance map and the area plan report itself recommended 5 stories rather than 7 stories. Staff report did find the request, as with this, to be inconsistent with the area plan, but consistent overall for some similar reasons. That request was also approved. That was approved by the Planning Commission and unanimously approved by City Council. Last thing I would note is that the public hearing is scheduled for next week. And I am happy to take any questions either now or following the other presentations.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody have any questions for Jason? Councilmember Fort?
So Jason, thank you for your presentation. In the area of the Hillsborough Street corridor where this particular rezoning is being contemplated, the other recent developments are at 4 or 5 stories. Is that correct? On this particular portion of the Hillsborough Street corridor, I'm not talking about Village District or the other end of Hillsborough Street.
The adjacent, I can bring up actually the map that probably would show that better than I could describe in words. Let me pull back open that screen. So this shows existing zoning. Along Hillsborough Street. Sorry, going between a couple of different presentations. So currently zoned for 3 stories, there's 4-story, or excuse me, currently zoned for 4 stories. There's 4 and 5-story zoning nearby. I guess it depends on what we would consider to be the nearby area. 4 stories, it is 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks east to see 7-story zoning on Hillsborough.
Yeah, because I'm just talking about that end where there's the roundabout, excuse me, and then I guess south headed towards the fairgrounds, that end of Hillsborough Street where this project is being contemplated. Everything else in this particular part of the corridor is 3 or 4, maybe 5 stories, somewhere between 3 and 5 stories. Correct?
That's right. On the north side, the portion on the south side, the NC State portion, zoned for 12.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any additional questions? Councilmember Buffkin, do you have any questions for staff?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So, Mr. Harden, thanks also for your presentation. You do lots of these small area plans, and you just kind of walked us through, how to, I guess, the framework for rezoning decision making and how a small area plan fits in. Do you think there's confusion in the mind of the public about what a small area plan is and how it factors into council's decisions about rezoning? And if so, can you maybe identify the source and suggest some ways that we maybe mitigate that confusion?
Well, the comprehensive plan is not explicit about the weight that an area plan should carry. And one of the fundamental principles of planning is, and in fact, there's a reason why it's called the comprehensive plan, because it does look to take a citywide and even in some cases region-wide look at these fundamental questions. But unresolved is that question of when the city undergoes a planning process for a specific area, is that the determinative factor, or is that a very important factor among other factors? So that's something that the plan does not directly address.
Okay. Do we have any additional questions of staff at this time? Okay, what I'm going to do then is turn this over to Michael Birch. If we could have the countdown timer on, that would be helpful. We're going to do 10 minutes per side, then we'll see if there's any questions and we'll continue the conversation. So, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, Michael Birch with Longleaf Law Partners here on behalf of the applicant. If we could go maybe 2 slides ahead. I thank Jason Harden very much for his thorough presentation, and I'll do my best not to duplicate much. If we could go maybe 3 more slides ahead. So the purpose of this rezoning is to facilitate redevelopment of these parcels for up to 7 stories closer to Hillsborough Street, transitioning down to 5 stories, and then transitioning down to 3 stories adjacent to the residential. New project would include ground level commercial uses and hopefully a hotel above. There's also the potential that there is apartment units above. And so what we see here is trying to provide something that is additive to the street, that adds to the vibrancy, the walkability of Hillsborough Street. I just want to note here, just give you a sense of how deep some of the non-residential zoning goes into the neighborhood to the north. And we'll just compare that to what we are proposing just a few minutes. So if we could go to the next slide. And Jason touched on it, just this site's proximity to not only the very frequent transit that exists on Hillsborough Street today, the planned higher frequency bus transit planned for Hillsborough Street, but also this site's location relative to the planned BRT station down at Western Boulevard. We have direct kind of pedestrian access to that stop that's just over half a mile away via Dan Allen, with pedestrian facilities the whole way. We could go to the next slide, please. So here, just to reiterate where we're limiting the CX zoning versus the RX zoning, again, adjacent to the neighborhood. And if we could jump 2 slides, want to note that you'll see the purple line in Bagwell there. It's about 112 feet off of Hillsborough Street. That is a limitation of where ground level retail can be. So we're actually, again, kind of bringing that non-residential activity closer to the street and not into the neighborhood where it's currently today, particularly on that 2808 parcel. If we could go to the next slide, I really want to kind of settle here for a minute about height. So for 30 years, from 1986 until the UDO was adopted, height along Hillsborough Street was governed by the University Village Streetscape and Parking Plan, and a part of that was what was called the sun angle. This sun angle is what was applied to the Aloft Hotel when it was being rezoned to demonstrate compliance with that plan. Same for the 7-story project at the Two Guys Pizza location. This here demonstrates that our conditions are consistent with that sun angle. that sun angle was meant to represent kind of the most conservative view of impact on adjacent properties in terms of shadows, but it has been used as a kind of a more aggressive transition requirement to residential areas. And so we have fashioned our conditions to be consistent with that sun angle. If we could go to the next slide. So Jason covered a lot of the details of our request. So I want to touch briefly on the area plan, and Ted Van Dyke is here and can respond to any questions or elaborate on anything that council may have questions about. And staff did a great job of kind of highlighting these things in their 7-page memo that was provided to you. But I want to emphasize that the small area plan guidance is just that. It's just guidance, and it is only one of many considerations for council to take into account when making its decision. And it also notes that an area plan guidance has a focus on a particular area, but that the comprehensive plan and the fact that the comp plan policies are given weight above that is because it looks at a much broader and looks at the impacts and the benefits, not just to that very small area, but on a citywide basis. We think that this case has benefits on a citywide basis while also providing appropriate transitions and protections for the neighborhood to the north. This area plan guidance is also to be balanced with other policies, particularly policies that have been adopted after the area plan that reflect the council's updated policy decisions and investments. So this area plan was initiated in 2012 based on data largely from that time period, public input through 2015, even though it wasn't adopted until 2018. But since that time, council has planned more frequent transit on Hillsborough Street. You have invested in BRT along Western Boulevard. You have emphasized housing supply and housing choice, and you have emphasized carbon emission reduction. And so we think this case achieves all of those things that this council has, since the area plan, been kind of promoting and in line with your investments. Also want to note in the staff memo that it notes that the area plan, that there was not necessarily consensus in the community over what growth scenario was best. It notes that less than 50% were in favor of the moderate growth scenario, which was ultimately adopted, but that over 40% were in favor of a higher, more aggressive growth scenario. What ultimately got adopted largely institutionalized current zoning. And because of that, the council, when it was adopting it, noted that and emphasized that they were just adopting policy, that they weren't making a zoning decision, and that they anticipated that future applicants would come through the process and ask for a rezoning, and that it would be individually evaluated on its own merits at that time. It wasn't requiring that every case be consistent with the area plan height guidance. And as Jason noted, you've had 2 such cases that are inconsistent with the height guidance that have been unanimously approved by council within the last 2 years. But I want to note and emphasize that the process was set up to kind of keep the policy guidance low, force an applicant to go through the process, and for it to be evaluated on its own merits. And so that's what we're trying to do here. That's what we've been trying to do for the past 18 months is engage with the community, with the Hillsborough Street Community Service Corp, with Oaks and Spokes. And in response to what we've heard, we've added conditions related to public art, related to activating the street, related to providing micro mobility options and trying to enhance that. So that is what we have focused on throughout this process, is to how to make this case and this development the best that it can be for the street, because we want to add to the street. We want to add vibrancy to the street. We want to put people on the ground to support the retailers that are there and those that will come. So finally, just want to emphasize, again, our consistency with the comp plan, with those important policies, and that were reasonable and in the public interest, because we're providing appropriate height transitions consistent with the sun angle, that were compatible with the surrounding area as noted in the staff report, that we've limited height adjacent to the neighborhood, that we've restricted retail closer to the neighborhood. And I want to note that, and this was a point that was made by a few planning commission members, that Hillsborough Street is an area where the city has invested heavily in pedestrian amenities and transit amenities. And the city is experiencing growth all over downtown and its other growth centers. And that's being seen through the number of rezoning requests for additional height and density throughout those growth centers. But if the small area plan, this small area plan, and the height is rigidly applied, then the growth demand in this area will shift to other parts of the city where there hasn't been the same level of investment in transportation and transit, and will have a greater impact on those areas of the city. So again, I'm at the end of my time. Again, Ted Van Dyke is here if there are any questions, particularly on this case, but also the area plan process, et cetera. He's here to answer any of those questions the council may have.
Okay, thank you very much. What I'm going to do first is then move to some of the people who are waiting to speak in opposition. I would ask Mr. Van Dyke to stay on. I do have some questions about a rezoning I seem to recall that was proposed for this area and was voted down by council. I think it was 4 stories at the time. But I do have some questions, but I want to hear from everybody first beforehand. So what I'm going to ask is, Alan, if you could just go by the order in which people called in. And I will remind everybody there's 10 minutes total for now. Try to give your neighbors and others time to speak on this. Don't take the 10 minutes for yourself. And let's start with who's first, Alan?
The first person is Donna Bailey, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, and I have some slides. Alan?
Yes. Mr. Hardin, do you have those slides available, sir?
I do. I'm bringing those up momentarily.
And Mayor Baldwin, we have about 14 people that are speaking. Some people, mine is probably going to be just a little bit longer, but other people have shorter comments.
Okay. And then, like I said, we will have a discussion after all sides are heard.
Okay. And I'll just tell you, Jason, when I move to the next slide, is that correct? Jason?
Yes, that's
Okay.
fine.
Okay, all right. My name is Donna Bailey, and I have been intimately involved with the Hillsborough Street for over 20 years. I was a member of the BID and part of the original 1999 Hillsborough Street revisioning. I also attended every public meeting for the Hillsborough Street Small Area Plan. Please note the date of adoption. So it's just, it's 3 years old. It's about to be 4. I have a very different takeaway than what Michael Birch, who I don't believe attended any of the meetings, has. Next slide, please. We need to make sure that everyone understands that the map that's in the comp plan is not clear. Jason did a pretty good job of showing that 4 stories is the recommended height for Hillsborough Street. I don't think we would be having this conversation if the comp plan map was more accurate. Next slide. This is the correct map that shows the FLUM and the future guidance. This map is very clear as to the height guidance, and this is from page 6 of the small area plan. A big problem with the comp plan is that it reduces a 144-page document to a 3-page summary. The actual document, and I hope you take the time to go read it, provides very clear language that 4 stories is the right height on this street, and it will double the density. The 5-story height was totally removed from the plan. This is a 20-year plan, and we're only in year 3, almost year 4. No one is against the redevelopment of this property. What the community objects to is the total disregard for the area plan and the 7 stories that is requested, especially at this site since it is adjacent to residential. The applicant has never offered any kind of compromise. All the other benefits that are being offered work with a 4-story plan and won't set a negative precedent for the rest of the street and disregard all the work that so many people participated in. This will further undermine the trust in this council if the area plan is not upheld. Can I please have the next slide? This is some of the guiding principles from page 26. Preserve and enhance existing neighborhoods, because healthy neighborhoods are a benefit and we need to work with both. Next slide, please. This slide shows the areas of transition to protect neighborhoods that are directly adjacent to residential. This site is part of that. And I also want to bring your attention to, you'll see there's a little like leg that jumps up that goes further north that is in this purple area. That is the parking lot to the State Employees Credit Union. That will never get developed. Next slide, please. This shows how in-depth the area plan was, that we studied all of these, the infrastructure, the transit. Hillsborough Street has always been a very high transit area, so the addition of the BRT is not really going to affect this. Can you sit next slide, please? This slide is very important, and this shows, if you look at existing conditions to the proposed conditions, we will more than double the density if we just build out to an average of 3.8 or 4 stories. So we're already accommodating for a 20% increase. You can leave that slide now. Mayor Baldwin, I would like to remind you about the failed 7-story building that you voted on before the area plan was adopted. You called me up that night and promised that you wouldn't vote for another 7-story building on Hillsborough Street. I expect you, do you remember calling me that night?
No, I do remember you calling me and saying some not very kind words to me.
Marianne, you called me that night and you promised
Donna,
me.
you're using other people's time right now.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Thank you.
I expect you to follow through on your word. I also hope that the $300,000 of taxpayer funding that you voted for to fund the area plan will not be wasted. One of the reasons that Hillsborough Street was added to the Cameron Village area plan was because of the contentious projects on the street. Since the area plan has been in effect, there have been many new projects at 3 and 4 stories that have been built and have been very successful. Councilor Buffkin, I know you're proud of the area plan for Midtown. In your most recent letter to your constituents, you said one of the core functions of council is planning for growth. The Hillsborough area plan is a very fine-tuned document that has already planned for 100% increase in density. This area plan is only 3 years old, and we expect you to honor this plan like you would want your area plan to be upheld. The applicant was well aware that the area plan was in effect before they purchased the property. It is not the place of council or the neighbors to be held responsible for their financial decisions. This area plan represents the best of community engagement, and a plan works. Please deny this rezoning.
Okay, next, stop the clock, please. We have 4 minutes left. Who is next to speak, Alan?
Next person to speak, ma'am, is Frank Harmon.
Okay, if Frank could come on.
Sure. Well, my name's Frank Harmon. I've lived for 30 years at 114 Brooks Avenue, 1.5 blocks away from the Bagwell site. I support development on this parcel. I just think, however, that the proposal at 7 stories is too high. This will be at least 90 feet high and out of scale with the adjacent neighborhood. It will also add dangerous traffic to Bagwell Street. I think there's a solution that we can all get behind, which is to make it 60 feet tall, to limit the increase in traffic on Bagwell Street, and to provide a better transition buffer of, for example, 30 feet. It has been suggested that increased building height will help to reduce carbon emissions. What will really help to reduce carbon emissions are lively, healthy neighborhoods for children and families, and a great mix of housing types, as currently found in University Park and in the City of Raleigh proposal for missing middle housing. The small area plan for Hillsborough Street can double the density of the area in less than 20 years. We could line Hillsborough Street with 7-story buildings and not equal a fraction of the density we can achieve by sticking with the small area plan. I urge you to vote against this proposal.
Thank you. If you could stop the clock. Who is next?
The next individual is Sally Ricks.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sally Ricks. I live near this rezoning case, and I'm a retired campus planner. And I too served on the Cameron Village Hillsborough Street small area plan. We certainly envisioned increases in density when we were working on the plan. But we also knew that to bring the university and the neighborhoods back to support the street, growth would have to enhance rather than overwhelm the surroundings. Growth models showed that the necessary density could be achieved with 4 stories, thereby preserving and enhancing the positive attributes of the nearby neighborhood. The tens of millions of public and private dollars spent on this corridor are a testament to the quality and success of this plan. And private investment has well demonstrated there's opportunity for the 4-story height to build profitable density. Donna mentioned the support of council, including that of then at-large Councilor Baldwin, to approve over $300,000 in consulting fees for the process for this small area plan. And at the time, it was celebrated as a model process for citizen engagement. Please don't undermine these successes by rehashing the approved small area plan standards over this one tempting rezoning case. It would not only further erode citizen confidence in government, but would have unintended consequences for the delicate balance between new development and the well-being of the surrounding area. Everyone needs to prosper to continue the Hillsborough Street revitalization success story. So please say no to Z6820. Thank you.
Craig Smith is next.
Okay,
All right. How much time we got left?
52 seconds.
Let me read fast. Hi, Craig Smith. I live on Raymond Street, about 300 yards from the property. It's my thoughts that approving the zoning on this north side of Hillsborough Street would allow buildings in excess of 4 stories adjacent to existing single family and would set a precedent that would ripple east and west of this location. The Raleigh planning staff report indicated that this zoning change would increase the allowed development intensity of this property from 41 to 144 possible apartment units. I ask you, what is a valid justification for allowing over a 350% increase in the allowed development intensity and massing of this property, other than that of enhancing the bottom line for the property owner and developer? In my mind, there are no benefits to my neighborhood or the citizens of Raleigh for allowing an additional 3 stories on this property. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to first off go back to the applicant and ask if there's any response to some of these comments.
Yes, Madam Mayor, a few. So first, in response to Councilor Fort's question about other developments in the area being done at 5 stories, I want to note that this site is just over an acre, and where neighborhood transitions are required. I want to note that the ones that I think she was referring to across the street, number one, for Kane's project, that site was 4 times larger in terms of just land area. The standard 3 times larger. Capstones 3 times larger. This is just in land area, with no transitions required of the Kane and Standard project. And so, though, because of the larger land area, that can absorb construction costs, land costs, over a higher number of units, but possibly at a lower height here. Again, we have just over 1 acre on this site. I think you have examples in front of you as to what happens on these small sites under current zoning or 4-story zoning. You get these 16-unit buildings with throwaway retail with no parking. The retail can't be supported because there's no parking, and it only, again, has 16 units. And you see how unsuccessful many of those retail locations are, and that they don't add to the street. So we're trying to propose something here that's additive to the street and accommodates the housing supply that we desperately need in this location. In response to a couple of the comments, I want to note, as was shown on one of Ms. Bailey's slides, the whole 4-story height is an average across the whole street. It's an average. Much of Hillsborough Street is built out at 1 and 2 stories. And I want to note that the 7-story rezoning at the Two Guys Pizza that was approved for 7 stories is actually getting developed by this applicant at 2 stories. And from a precedent standpoint, this council has unanimously approved 2 cases already that exceed the area plan guidance. And lastly, I think it may be getting lost because it keeps getting characterized as we're having 7 stories adjacent to the neighborhood. But again, this case has conditions that require transitions from 7 stories down to 5 stories, down to 3 stories, again, which will then have neighborhood transitions. So again, we've built that, into the case. So I think that's all I have right now, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Mr. Van Dyke if he's still on the phone. I just wanted a refresher on, first off, your experience with a small area plan, but also the rezoning that was proposed there. I remember it, but I don't remember it clearly. Very briefly, that would just be helpful to me for some perspective.
Thank you, Mayor. Happy to chat for a minute about both subjects. I actually looked back today and I have my draft report of the small area plan that was actually issued in January of 2017. And that reminded me that we've been working on it for a year or more before it was issued. And it took another year or more before it was voted on. It was a long process. There was a lot of different opinions about what the appropriate height was on Hillsborough Street. And I think Mr. Birch characterized it accurately, that I think we were looking at averages and long view. And the last thing that we were encouraged to do as part of the process, or that we had time or energy to do, was to go site by site and look at what the appropriate height for each parcel on the street was. In fact, you'll remember there's an entire area of Vanderbilt Street that was the subject of so little consensus that we just bubbled it and said future study. Also, I think Michael did a good job of reminding us that the crazy sawtooth pattern that we have of our zoning lines on the north side of Hillsborough Street are largely because the new mapping was placed over the old mapping. So much of what's mapped in our new UDO was really a reflection of what was in our old code. And there was no real systematic effort to create consistent boundaries between commercial and residential. If it was commercial before, it was commercial in the new UDO. If it was residential before, it stayed that way. And as far as the zoning that we undertook in 2015, you're absolutely right. We looked at two parcels, the corner of Hillsborough and Bagwell, and we proposed a 5-story building in the 4-story zoning. But we had committed, the same applicant committed to some conditions that would have left that building within the 4-story height limit. We heard the same things at that time about incompatibility with the plan, and we're unsuccessful untangling the difference between a broad vision and a comprehensive look at a large, I think almost 3-mile area of the city when you count Cameron Village and Hillsborough Street together, and looking at individual parcels and individual projects and deciding their merits one by one. So you're absolutely right. We did bring a case forward for a much smaller building on this corner in 2015, and we're unsuccessful.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to refresh my memory on that. Alan, how many additional people do we have signed up to speak?
We have 10 additional people to speak, ma'am.
Okay. What I'm going to do is ask everybody, like, put on for a minute, but then we will have a discussion after that. I just want everybody's opinion to be heard. We've already heard pretty clearly from several residents what their thoughts are. So if you could start your comments, Alan, who would be next?
The next individual is Tika Hicks.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Baldwin and committee members. I'll try to be very brief. I'll skip over the niceties. I am in support of redevelopment and increased density on this site. And I think you've heard lots of arguments for why not to develop here. I do ask that you consider the future land use map designation and the small area plan in combination, and to use it as guidance for the north side of Hillsborough Street, as I see it as clearly defining a vision for development there that does not include 7 stories. I also wanted to highlight that this case is fundamentally different from the 2 previous cases that were mentioned, Z4220 let me back up. Z4020, which was approved further down Hillsborough Street. This site is uniquely separated by streets from nearby residential lots. Case Z4220 is also fundamentally different from this site. It's located in the Village District, and it is not adjacent to any low-density residential. It's the low density is being removed by that case. So that I ask that either further study of this area be done as was identified by City Council and recommended in 2018 when the small area plan was adopted, and that the future land use map and the small area plan be upheld and implemented. And based on these facts, I respectfully ask that you deny Z6820. And I thank you for your careful consideration.
Thank you. Just so you noticed, I am watching the clock, but I'm not going to be jumping on somebody after a minute. So want you to finish your thoughts. Thanks, Tika. Who's next, Alan?
Next is Candice Hegler.
Hello, I'm Candice Hegler. I'm a university professor who lives near this site, and I have lived near several universities, and I know how important it is for the nearby neighborhoods to remain healthy. I've also observed how easy it is for the conditions to swing the other way and become unhealthy in the absence of constant vigilance and renewing the existing housing. I participated in the generation of this small area plan, and it reflects a win-win compromise of many different interests. Consequently, we've made 2 major rounds of improvement in our older home and landscape due to confidence that this small area plan is governing the redevelopment of Hillsborough Street. Within 1/8 mile of my home, there are several 1- or 2-story duplexes and other multifamily dwellings, all of which were there when I purchased my home. I and my neighbors are not NIMBYs. To the contrary, we have already embraced density and a variety of housing options that fit the scale of our historic neighborhood. Other developments are occurring at 3 stories, as you can see a few blocks west on the street. And we believe that for the overall health of this critical neighborhood, for the university community and the city, that we need to preserve the health of the neighborhood along with all the other important considerations that were mentioned and deny this 7-story rezoning request. Thank you.
Okay, next, Alan. Alan? Have we lost Alan?
I apologize, Mayor. I thought I was on mute. The next person is Evelyn Persley. I apologize, ma'am.
Okay,
Mayor.
thank you. Technology, what can we say?
All right. I'm Evelyn Persley, living at 115 Brooks Avenue. When I moved to my home in 1999, I noted that Hillsborough Street was not the most attractive area and thought it could use some intelligent planning for redevelopment. Frankly, it looked as if buildings were cheaply and quickly thrown up with little thought or planning, and I remember wondering, what were those people thinking when they allowed that to happen? I have found University Park to be a vibrant home to faculty, staff, and students of both NC State and Meredith. Particularly during the pandemic shutdown, it lived up to our hopes for walkable communities. I would urge you to consider what the increase in traffic from a 7-story residential property would do to a 1-block-long secondary street with no sidewalks that ends at a one-way street with no sidewalks that evidently operates as a well-traveled thoroughfare between Dixie Trail and Brooks Avenue. I urge you to think not only about the current state of our neighborhood, but also to think ahead 20 to 50 years when others could be asking, what were those people thinking?
Thank you. Ellen, who's next?
Next is Thomas Cotter.
There, thank you. I am a professor emeritus from NC State, and I'm also president of T. Carter Consulting. I have lived on Bagwell Avenue for almost 30 years, 17 Bagwell. So to famously misquote, I can see Hillsborough from my house. And so I have a lot of on the ground experience on Hillsborough Street. And I can tell you that the word that we are grossly underestimating is danger, danger, danger. Bagwell Avenue teeing off Hillsborough is a dangerous street. As has been said previously, not only is there no sidewalk there, but parking is open for 2-hour parking for NC State commuters who love to park here and then walk to campus. And they rush to get these parking spaces, and I have been a victim of that because my car was parked out in front of my house legally, and one of these rushing students with a 6,000-pound vehicle crashed into my truck. And that's not our car. That's not the only experience, but there are a lot of walkers on Hillsborough Street, and around the corner is Fred Oles, and Everett connects to that, and there's no sidewalk on Everett either. And it's you have to walk and be very smart and very responsible because cars are quiet. Some are hybrid and don't make any sound. And I think it's already a very dangerous place. It's the most dangerous street in the NCSU Hillsborough area. And I think that it's just a matter of time till somebody gets hurt. And if we do a 4-story increase in for the hotel, for a 4-story hotel, you're probably adding 100 people to a block-long street. If we make it 7-story, you may be adding 300. I think it's already unsafe. I think this will be a dangerous move, and I think that the council will be liable if they do it. I certainly, if I got knocked down, I would sue the council if they built a 7-story, allowed a 7-story hotel and that many extra people and not accommodating for all the traffic. I think it's a disaster waiting to happen. And I think the statement by I think it's Hardin and Birch grossly underestimate the danger on Bagwell Avenue. That's what I have.
Thank you.
The next
Alan,
individual is Kevin Collins.
okay.
Technology. Mr. Collins, you're now unmuted. You're now unmuted, sir.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I am Kevin Collins. I've lived at 29 Bagwell Avenue for 20 years. I'd like to ask that you deny the 7-story rezoning as it'll negatively impact our quality of life. After my wife and I purchased the home, we learned from neighbors it was previously the home of the Upchurch family, one of whom, Avery Upchurch, went on to serve as Raleigh mayor, and he's who our municipal building is named after. Bagwell has been a great environment for raising our 3 children, as it must have been for the Upchurches, and we like it to continue that way for generations to come. We have a dynamic mix of residents, often visiting out with each other, working in the yards, walking dogs, playing with kids and grandkids, walking to classes, not only NC State, but also Fred Olds Elementary, which is 2 blocks up on Dixie Trail. We welcome new development, but we have to be careful not to cross the tipping point where traffic and parking become a constant nightmare. As was mentioned, we don't have sidewalks on Bagwell, so our safety is a major concern. And also, as mentioned, there's no sidewalks on the one-way section of Everett that Bagwell intersects. The street already feels high density, and traffic and parking are nearly saturated. I've also had my car hit when it was parked legally in front of my house. A lot of our houses don't have off-street parking, so residents park in their front yards or on the street. The intersection with Hillsborough Street and Bagwell is already a bottleneck at various times during the day. My daughter has her learner's permit and drives to school with me as the co-pilot. And on a lot of mornings, there's a semi truck taking up the right lane of Bagwell at the intersection with Hillsborough. So the only way she can turn right on Hillsborough Street is from the left lane of Bagwell Avenue. And meanwhile, cars are trying to turn right from Hillsborough Street onto Bagwell into the lane she's sitting in. Multiple restaurants there on the corner deliver food, and their drivers park along Bagwell and use it heavily. The leased parking lot across from the proposed project also brings a lot of extra activity through that intersection. And aside from all the traffic and parking and safety concerns, I'm worried that a 7-story building will ruin some of the favorite things we like about living on Bagwell. It'll block out the sunlight and threaten the beautiful old oak trees that line the street. And it'll block our view of the WRAL TV tower being lit up every Christmas, which is a tradition that we look forward to each year. Thank you.
Michael Lindsay is next.
Hi, before I start, I had a presentation. Can we pull that up? A visual, three slides. Thank you. Hi, Mayor Baldwin, committee members. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you. Most folks I talk with are in favor of redeveloping this corner of Hillsborough Street and Bagwell. Residents would be happy with a new development like the mixed-use building across the street that you can see in the photo. A similar 4-story structure would be allowed under the small area plan. Next slide, please. Thank you. What residents are concerned about is the number of stories that Z6820 is requesting. This increased building height is out of scale with other new construction along Hillsborough Street. Next slide, please. We had 2 Hillsborough Wade CAC meetings where this case was presented. At the end of the last one, we did a poll asking our membership, do you support this rezoning as it stands now? 4% said yes, 75% said no, 21% said not sure. Please consider the opinions of well-informed residents who will be affected by this rezoning case. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Do you have, Michael, do you have available numbers of number of attendees?
Sorry, I off the top of my head, I want to think we had around 40 some people in that meeting. I can get you that. I should have had that in the presentation, but I was trying to keep it short. Okay. I do know the 4% in favor represented 1 person, just to give you an idea.
Okay. That would just be helpful to know. Okay. Thank you.
The next individual is Craig Ralph. Please don't freeze up on me. No, okay. Oh, my Mayor, can you hear me, Mayor?
Yes.
It appears that my computer has done the unthinkable and has frozen on me. I cannot believe this. Possible.
Was Mr. Ralph the last person registered?
Actually, there was Mr. Ralph and there was a John Philip Moon and Sides. And
Okay, so 3 more people.
yes, ma'am. And my computer seems to have done the unthinkable and has frozen on me. And I now no longer have the ability to perform my.
Okay, let's, you stay on that. We'll see if you can get that working and we can get Mr. Ralph, Mr. Moon and Ms. Sides on here. In the meantime, I will go back and just ask if Councilmember Buffkin or Councilmember Fort have any questions for those who have spoken or of the applicant. Any additional questions or comments?
If, Madam Mayor, if I may, do have a couple questions of the applicant. I know we've had a few conversations and there's been some conversation about a hotel, but I want to know, has your client identified a particular hotel flag or done any of that research?
Oh, wait a minute. If Mr. Birch is on here, Alan, I don't think can.
Yes. Can you hear me now, Mayor?
Yes, we can.
Yes. So again, from a hotel standpoint, again, typically those conversations with the flag, particular users happen once a property is entitled. That's just typically how hotel flags brands work. But because of this applicant's, understanding of Hillsborough Street, involvement with Hillsborough Street, involvement with projects, kind of end to end along Hillsborough Street, they are very familiar with the market and the market need and demand for hotel rooms here. And so that, again, has been a driver, for the 7-story. But to answer your question, that there's not a flag on the hook or signed up or anything like that.
Okay, and I know that you referenced several times that this project would help with some of the housing issues within the city, but a hotel wouldn't contribute to that, correct?
So, correct. A hotel would not assist directly with the housing, but if this was a hotel, I don't think it would be just a hotel, because you have a 7-story transitioning down to a 5-story, transitioning down to a 3-story. We would anticipate some housing. It wouldn't be necessarily associated with the hotel, but on that northernmost portion of the property that's zoned RX3, we would anticipate housing in that area. So yes, we would still be contributing to the housing supply there.
Okay, and do you have an estimation of what the price point of the housing would be?
No, ma'am. I know that was something that you asked the last, when we spoke yesterday afternoon. But there's a couple of kind of factors in play there. One, there are tenants in place at these properties, both the commercial and the residential properties that have leases in place. And so also just permitting timing, if something was started right after this rezoning case, it wouldn't be open for at least 3 years. And obviously we've been in a very fluid economy with construction costs, et cetera. We expect that it'll be a market rate project on the residential side, but we really don't know what that means in 3 to 4 years. I do want to make a kind of a corollary statement to that, which is, I think we can make a comparison of rents in a 7-story building versus rents in a 3 to 4-story building. Because of construction costs and because you're spreading land costs over a much smaller number of units, then the rent would obviously have to be higher to make that a workable project. So.
I have one question for Mr. Birch. You've alluded to the fact that this the applicant is very familiar with Hillsborough Street, whatnot. Do you have any examples of other developments that this group has done?
Yeah, I mean, they've been involved in a number of them. Again, I don't know if any have gone vertical recently. I think maybe one of them may be on the line, but they were involved in the Hillsborough and Turner rezoning down there near the substation further west. Again, they have come in and bought out of bankruptcy the development on the Two Guys site and are in for site plan approval for that 2-story project with, restaurant retail uses. We have 105 Friendly Drive, which is across the street. They were the broker for 2811 Hillsborough, which was the one on the south side of Hillsborough that was shown. Their offices, they purchased the Legends site downtown and their office, brand new office there on Fayetteville Street.
Okay, thank you. Alan has indicated that his computer is now working. I note that the time is 3:48. I will have 3 additional residents who are signed up to speak. Alan, if we could keep this brief, we're going to have to get on the work session call at 4 o'clock. So I think Mr. Ralph was next.
Yes, Madam Baldwin, Mayor Baldwin, and the rest of council members and staff, thank you very much. I'm Craig Ralph, 2714 Clark Avenue, a block and a half from the site. Given this short period of time, I'm just going to make some observations. I've lived in Raleigh all my life. We built our house here in 1997 because I watched Hillsborough Street transition up and down, up and down. Hillsborough Street finally stabilized. And it's that stability and predictability that's bringing new families, new investments, new children on the streets into our neighborhood. Because the new investors are saying, oh, I see what we get here. Low density buildings, predictability, walkability. And to change that in the middle of the game would be unfair to future residents and some of the current residents. I'd also like to challenge the walkability of the site. East-west, I could support a walkability. North, not a chance. Bagwell, you've already heard how dangerous it is. Same with one-way Everett. Additionally, as a 51-year developer specializing in retail real estate, the growth demand for retail is dubious at best. The uncommon can't lease 1 square foot of retail. The retail we have on Hillsborough Street is an all-time low. The quality of tenants is bad. And it's not because of parking. It's because the quote walkability is not attracting the quality of tenants we want. So thank you for your time. I respectfully ask you to deny this and I ask the applicant to come back and work with the neighbors. Thank you, Madam Baldwin.
Thank you very much.
The last individual, Mayor, is inside Mr. John Phillip Moon had to drop.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Ann Sides, S-I-D-E-S, and I'm speaking in opposition to the proposal, and this is why. I was a member of the advisory committee for the Cameron Village Small Area Plan. We advisory committee members, we were all volunteers. We represented a cross-section of the stakeholders within our community, homeowners, renters, businesses, churches, schools, investors. And the small area plan was a transparent, consultative, inclusive process. We built consensus at every step. And regarding the zoning case under discussion today, our decision to designate that parcel NX4 wasn't a fluke. It wasn't an afterthought. It was made after careful consideration and consultation with the stakeholders. The small area plan was the result of a legitimate citizen-based process that's already successfully guiding growth and change in the neighborhood. Growth and change that started long before the small area plan itself began. And there's no good reason to place the interests of the petitioner over the clearly documented will of the community.
I see that Councilmember Cox has just joined us. We are getting ready to drop off from this. I know that you could not be here today, and that was excused absence. What I'm going to, well, first off, we have a public hearing on this matter set for January 18th. That notification has already taken place. It will be virtual. I'm going to ask that we report this out with no action taken, hold the public hearing, and then see if there's a need for additional committee time. Are you good with that, Councilor Fort?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't feel comfortable voting on this one way or another until we have a public hearing. I will make the motion then to report this out with no action taken. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Councilmember Fort, all in favor? Okay, that's 4-0. Clerk. One thing I would like to ask staff for, we heard a lot about traffic and, danger and the lack of sidewalks, whatnot. Have we looked at type of traffic or accident study in that area? Do we know the number of accidents that have occurred? Have we looked at that at all?
Mayor, I'll take that. I don't believe that has been done. I don't know that we have anybody here that would be able to speak to that, frankly.
Okay. Is that something we could do for the public hearing that you could present as part of what was a very thorough and excellent presentation, by the way? Thank you for that. But I think having more information on that would be helpful.
Certainly, we can see what information we can pull together in advance of the public hearing.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, this is Jason Myers in Transportation. That's not something that you can usually do for rezonings. So to my knowledge, that hasn't been done in the area, but we'll work with traffic engineering and see what we can come up with.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody who signed up to speak today. Please note that we will have the public hearing on this January 18th. And if you would like to speak, please make sure you sign up by Friday. Is there anything else? Any of the council members? Councilmember Cox?
Yes, I apologize for the conflict that prevented me from getting here sooner, but I was on council when the small area plan was passed. I voted in favor of it. I continue to support it. I think small area plans play an important component and an important role in our planning and development, and it's also democratic. It was a process that involved not only residents but also developers at the time. It's only 4 years old, and it's my intention to support the small area plan going forward.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Buffkin?
Thank you, Mayor. It's sort of unrelated to the rezoning case, but related. Mr. Harden, I think, did us a good service in highlighting the ambiguity, I'll say, in the comprehensive plan about how small area plans are to be treated. I'd be interested in resolving some of that ambiguity and taking up the issue and amending the comprehensive plan to speak directly to exactly what a small area plan should mean when a rezoning case like this comes along. It was referenced earlier that I do have a significant small area plan in my district, and although not mentioned, I also have a rezoning case that presents some tension with the recommendations of that plan. So I think it'd be helpful policy guidance for the council to speak to what exactly a small area plan means and how it is to be weighted in these specific rezoning requests. Recognizing that's an issue for another day, but I'd like to receive some follow-up from the staff on how we might do that and when the appropriate time would be to take up that issue. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we have a discussion going on right now about small area plans and updating them, whatnot. That might lend itself to part of that discussion. Okay, Councilmember Cox.
Yes, I just want to respond to Councilmember Buffkin, in my opinion, and this is all going to go back to politics. I think this small area plans, when they are adopted, they supersede what is in the comprehensive plan. They build on top of the comprehensive plan. And I think my political position is that they take precedence over other policies in the comprehensive plan. That's why we created them, so that they can be sensitive to the context in which they're being applied. And so I think the interpretation that there is some sort of a conflict or ambiguity between the comprehensive plan and the small area plan is an incorrect interpretation, and that the small area plan supersedes other policies. And where there is ambiguity and conflict, then the small area plan takes precedence, in my opinion.
That's not what is said right now. I'm looking at the time. So let's, we all need to get on our work session. There'll be ample time for, I'm sure, robust discussion on this topic. Thank you for bringing that up, Councilmember Buffkin. And staff, if you have noted this, Councilmember Buffkin's request, let's look at appropriate time to maybe further have that discussion, as well as the pluses and minuses. So I thank you, everybody, for coming to the meeting today. Now let's hop on our work session, and we will have the public hearing on the 18th. Thank you so much.